But today, being the first Sunday of the new year, 2009, I thought we would do something just a little bit different today. Normally we would be in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. But I thought today that we may go back to an Old Testament story today in the book of Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 17. And a lot of us know this story about David and Goliath. And some people automatically then say, well, I know this story, so it's going to be boring, but today I just want you to look at it from a fresh point of view by us starting a new year out. As a matter of fact, when you walked in the door, you were given a handout sheet, and we're going to go through that sheet today. So I'd encourage you to fill in the blanks on the sheet, and you'll see why once we get through with it. But today we are in 1 Samuel. Let me ask you a question. If I drew a line today, if you were standing there in a row, and I drew a line in front of you, and I said, if you step across this line today, you will have a new start in life, you'll have a better life beginning today if you just step over this line. How many of you would do it? I believe every one of us was. How about if I walked up to you today and I said, if you take this little pill here, you'll lose all the weight that you want to lose. You'll never have to go to the gym. You'll never have to count calories or carbs. And you don't have to cut back on your eating. I'd be wealthy. I'd be willing to bet that every single one of you would say, give me 2 bottles of them instead of just 1 bottles. Too bad our goals can't come that quickly, can they? Now that we're in a new year, in 2008, my question is to you, do you have a dream for this new year? Do you have a goal in mind? Do you have something that maybe the Lord has laid on your heart that maybe for this new year, 2009, that maybe is something that you would like to accomplish that maybe you did not accomplish last year? Maybe it's something that the Lord just put on your mind right off the bat. So do you have a dream? Do you have a goal? Do you have something in place to help you reach those goals? Because as we know, even with like Weight Watchers as an example, in order for somebody to lose weight and do it successfully, they sit down, they have a plan for you to go by. A daily plan of how many calories you could take in, how much you can eat, how much exercise you need to do. And then you do it daily, not just once a week, but you do it daily. And then you come together once a week, usually on Saturday mornings. Well, they have meetings all throughout the whole week, I should say. But then they come together, and the reason they come together is to help hold each other accountable for their new goals that they have on losing weight. The other thing is, besides helping hold you accountable, also you get to hear other people's success stories. And what does that do to you? It encourages you to do the same. There's all different kinds of organizations that have things in place to help people reach their goals. And so as you go through and you start thinking about maybe something in the new year that the Lord might have you do to help find your purpose in life, then we need to establish some type of goals to help you meet that purpose that the Lord has set from. The Bible says that God saved us, and He saves us all for His purpose. Now, our goal is to find out what is His purpose for our lives. And I believe the only way that we could do that is by searching the Lord, by helping out in different areas in life. As we're going to see today, when David went to meet his brothers and he faced Goliath, David did not go to face Goliath with that purpose in mind. He was just going as part of the plan to go give his brother some food because his father would send him out there and bring good news back. But that's when the Lord then gave David a purpose in life. Same way with you and I. You may be saying right now, well, I don't really have a purpose for next year. The Lord hasn't really laid it on my heart yet as what to do for the new year. But you will see just by this story that we're going to go through today that how your purpose can come into effect, but then you have to follow through with the purpose, just like you do with Weight Watchers. And I kept wondering how come if I watch what I eat one day a week, I couldn't go to the buffet the other 6 days a week. It doesn't work that way. Neither does finding our goals. So as you're trying to pursue your success in the Lord, you have to be committed to finding out God's goals in your life. But then the key thing is following through in God's ways and not our own ways. Oftentimes we think the Lord's leading us to do something, but we don't want to follow the Lord's ways in doing it because oftentimes we think we have a better way of doing it instead of following the ways that the Lord has for us. So these principles on how to reach your goals, these God-given goals, they can be found in the story of 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and they were gathered at Sokoth, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Sokoth and Azekah and the Philistines, and Saul and the men of Israel, they were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines, they stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, which was about 9 feet 9 inches tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. That's somewhere between 175, 200 pounds. So he was a pretty big and strong man to be 9 foot 9 inches tall and carrying all this armor on him. Verse 6, and he had a bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and he cried out to the armies of Israel, and he said to them, Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. In verse 12, Now David was the son of the Ephraite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in the years, and the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to battle. The names to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn. Next to him was Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near, and he presented himself 40 days, mornings and evenings. So here we see the background that's kind of setting up this one of the most well-known stories throughout the entire Bible about David and Goliath. Here on one side, on a mountaintop, was the Israelites. Over on the other side were the Philistines. Both sides had come together, and they were going to meet, and they were going to have war against each other. Between the 2 mountains was a valley where they were to come down in to fight at. Now, this big guy, this guy named Goliath, he had come out to challenge the other opponents. It says that when he came out, that he was so big that all the other Israelites, they shrunk back. They had fright on their face. Could you imagine that? For one of us to come up against a guy that's 9 foot 9 inches tall. To give an example, the other night I was channel surfing and I come across Larry King, and they had this boxer on there. What's his first name? His last name is Mayweather? The boxer? Floyd Mayweather. Thank you, Judith, for that. All these guys in here, and Judith tells us. So here's Floyd Mayweather, and he's about this big, 145 pounds, not very big at all, and about that tall. Now, he was going to enter against a wrestling match against this other guy. I'm trying to think of his name. It's around the tip of my tongue, but he's a giant. This guy's like 7 foot 4 inches tall. So they had the 2 of them stand up next to each other. It's funny because I'm studying David and Goliath, laying there watching TV, studying, and I look up and I see here's this Goliath and here's this little guy down the air. And they had them stand up next to each other. This guy was huge compared to this little guy. So as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, wow, here's a true David and Goliath. And they even compared themselves to the story in the Bible. By the way, they asked this guy, they says, what are you going to get to fight this giant? He looked over at Vince McMahon, which was the head, he's the promoter, CEO of the WWE, and he says, he's guaranteed $20 million for that night. Wow. A lot of money. But they showed this little guy and this big guy. So you could see how these Philistines then coming out, this Philistine, this Goliath, and then the Israelites coming out being normal size, and they're looking at this guy. It freaked them out. It says their eyes got big and they shrunk back. You know, and then during the meantime, David's father, Jesse, David was at home taking care of the sheep. And he told David, he says, David, here's some food here. I want you to take these into your brothers, into war. Take some other food here and give it to the captain there. Give it to Saul and some of the other head people. Check on your brothers and see how they're doing. Then I want you to come back and report to me of how well they're doing. So David, he goes down and he's going to go down. He's going to check on his brothers. And we will see in a few minutes exactly what happened. But it says, though, that while David was there, that Goliath came out and he cried out loud, choose among you a man for war. And as we said, every single one of the Israelites, they were horrified. Probably Saul, because if you read back through the scriptures, Saul was a very tall man. Saul was probably a head taller than everybody else. So imagine how Saul must have felt, because here he is, the tall guy, so naturally, him being the head guy, people are going to think, well, Saul should step out. He's the biggest amongst us, and he's our leader. So he should take care of it. Even Saul is horrified of this guy that's stepping out, this guy named Goliath. And it says there that Goliath, after he looked at the people and they shrunk back, they didn't want anything to do with him, it says that Goliath came out 40 mornings and evenings, 40 days. Now we know 40 in the Bible to represent what? A time of testing and trials and suffering. As a matter of fact, rain pelted down on Noah's Ark for 40 days. The Israelites wandered around in the wilderness for how many years? 40 years. Jesus was tempted by Satan for how long? For 40 days. So we see 40 is a time of testing and trials. So now here David was. David's down there and he's giving his brothers the food and checking everything out. And while David's talking to his brothers, out comes Goliath to make his challenge. David looked around everybody and he seen how their faces were all frightened and they were very scared. Now David, he sees this, and David probably is thinking in his mind, I need to do something about this. I'm going to be the man. I'm going to be the guy to step up to the plate to take care of this. So here we're going to see how David fulfilled his goal of killing Goliath. Now, as I said, you may be sitting there thinking, well, Pastor Bill's talking about a new year coming up, and do I have new goals, or do I have goals in place? Has the Lord put in me maybe something that He would like for me to do this year? Some of you say, yes, I do, because just New Year's Eve, we had a couple of people say, has the Lord laid on your heart something? A couple of people said yes, and they announced what the Lord has laid on their heart. Some of the other people says, no, there's nothing laid on my heart yet. Well, as we're going to see here with David, when he started out to go down to see his brothers, he did not know what was coming up. And that is going to direct David's whole entire life just by him stepping up to the plate and being the man when it comes to this time of battle. So as I said, you like David, you may not have a plan, but if you just be available for the Lord to use you, then He will show you a purpose. But you have to be available. You have to be here, and you have to be available for the Lord to use that. So we're going to see, and you've got the sheet there, 10 aspects of goal setting. And it's all based right here off of 1 Samuel. The first one is you have to have a clear picture of what's going to happen. You have to have a mental vision of what's going to happen. As a matter of fact, go back to verse 17. Now I'm going to read that. Then Jesse said to his son David, now take for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run them to your brothers at the camp, and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back the news of them. Now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning. He left the sheep with the keeper, and he took the things, and he went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. In other words, they were getting ready to go at it. Verse 22, and David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, and he ran to the army, and he came and he greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. Now what were these words? The same words was back over there in verse 8. It says he stood up and he cried out to the armies, and he said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail and kill him, then you shall be our servants. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day, and give me a man that we may fight together. So now David heard it again with his own ears. Verse 24, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they fled from him, and they were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king enriched with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. Verse 28, now Eliab, his older brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he says, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? Can you see he's got an attitude? I know your pride and insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him towards another, and he said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. So here we see that David's out there, and the first thing that you have to do, a goal, is to establish a clear enough state in your mind. You have to have a clear picture of the goal. So right there in number 1, where that blank is, you write the word clear. You have to have a clear picture of what your goal is. You need to have some kind of a mental vision. When a guy is a boxer, he doesn't just set out to be a champion boxer. He usually has a vision of what he's to become. The same way, when you go and you want to lose weight, the best thing to do is look at a picture of you where you're a little bit thinner. That gives you a mental picture of what you're striving to become. So number 1, you have to have a clear vision, a clear mental vision. David had that vision. That vision was to kill Goliath. His goal was to kill Goliath. When David heard Goliath's challenge, he asked, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach? For who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David's goal right there, he was getting a vision. He's thinking in his mind, what's going to be the end result for the person who takes this guy away? What's going to be the reward that's given for taking that challenge? How many of us are willing to take some kind of a challenge unless we know there's a reward at the end of it? Why would you starve yourself if you don't have a mental vision that you're going to be thinner? You wouldn't want to starve yourself and then be heavier at the end of the 3 months or whatever it is you decide. But you want to have a mental vision. What would be the reward for my commitment? David seen the fright on everyone's face, and he had a heart for God's people. Now, when David went out to fight Goliath, it wasn't an act of violence, or he didn't have a desire to see bloodshed. That was not it at all. David's desire was to set free God's people. Because the Israelites were God's chosen people, David seen that these guys were being bullied by a big bully. And David says, this guy right through here, he's bringing fright on my brothers in the Lord. They were scared to death of him. So David says, I'll be the man with the plan. I'll be the guy to step up to the plate. That's why his brothers got upset with him, because they didn't want to step up. How many of you know that when you decide to do something, other people that really should be doing it, they want to come against you for it? So David, right through here, his immediate goal was to kill Goliath. But here's the neat part about it. When David set out against Goliath, that was his immediate goal, was to kill Goliath. But that immediate goal was part of the big picture who David would later on soon to become. So here's something I ask you. Whatever it is that you feel the Lord may be leading you to do, is the first step, do you have a first step plan just to be part of the big picture? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You know what I'm saying? You take step by step by step in order to get your plans accomplished. David had a vision, but he needed what needed to be done. He knew where he had to start at. So are your immediate goals, do you have a mental vision of them? Are your immediate goals, are they part of a larger plan or a goal that maybe God's placed in your heart? Maybe this year your goal may be to lose weight. Maybe your goal may be to buy a new home, or maybe to have an increase in your income. Maybe to start attending church more faithfully. Maybe to read through your Bible. So many people have never read the entire Bible. And I got to be the first one to tell you, until I started coming to Calvary Chapel, I had never read the entire Bible. Never. I could tell you a lot of these neat little stories, but I couldn't tell you about a lot of the stories that weren't so popular, such as this one. But the neat part about it is, when I decided to read the whole thing, the whole purpose of it was start in Genesis and quit it at the end of Revelation, so that you hear the entire counsel. That way you hear all the instructions from the Lord and you read the entire Bible. If you're planning to read the entire Bible this year, is get a Bible reading plan. They sell them at the Christian bookstore. It tells you how much to read every day to stay on target. But you have to have a plan for it. The same way, some people's goal, and somebody said to me the other night that one of my goals is for this new year is I want to be on Sundays and Wednesdays. I come right now once a week, but my goal is I want to come both times a week. Great, fantastic. Only you know what the Lord's laying on your heart. I don't know. That's between you and the Lord. Some people say, I'm trying to save up so that I could help my kids out. As we know, one of Amanda's goals this year, I'm sure, is learning to play an instrument. She's starting to take lessons. And she made the comment to us one day that she's looking forward to being able to stand up here and play. That's a goal. By her taking lessons right now, that's the immediate part where she starts, but the goal would be to be up here in the long run. That's what I'm trying to say. You got to have a clear picture in your mind of what is going to be the end result. Then you got to have a starting place with it. Just make sure that your goal, number one, is grounded in God's Word. Make sure that whatever the Lord's laid on your heart is of the Lord and not of yourself. And I'll talk through it in a few minutes. But one of my goals for this coming year is to get our church to be one of the most well-fed Christian believers in Haywood County. And the way that we do that is by teaching God's Word, by having discussion groups like what we have after our midweek service. That's why we chose to do the book of Daniel, because we're going to do the same thing as what we're doing in Ecclesiastes. We spend the first 25 minutes studying the Word, but then we spend the last 30 minutes discussions. We're going to be doing the same thing with the book of Daniel. Do you realize how much we learn from each other just by discussing? Another one of my goals is this year to start a discipleship class. For people that maybe have just come to know the Lord, or maybe people that has never grown in the Lord, and we're going to do a discipleship class where we actually get grounded in God's Word. That is the goals. But the whole thing is in order for us to become grounded in the Word, we have to take these little steps of hearing the teachings, going to the discussion groups, of attending a discipleship class. That's all part of the big picture, but those are just small steps in order to get to that area. I remember when I was in seminary school, we had a fellow that was teaching our class that particular week. A wonderful teacher, one of my favorite teachers. Fortunately, I got to hear him teach 2 or 3 different times for a week each time. And he talked about how his name was Ken Gobb. And he talked about that when he was starting out in the ministry as a young man, he had a wife and 4 kids. He was a traveling evangelist. But him and all his family traveled on a bus. And they went from town to town to town and did revivals at churches. They were also the musicians. So they would come in, set up their drums or amps and all that stuff. They would do the music, and then Ken Gobb would get up and he would actually go through and preach the message. He talked about how it got to the point where they spent most of their time broke down on the side of the road with this old raggedy bus that they drove around. He says, but back then, he says, we were lucky if we made $100 a month. Traveling around. He said, but things were less expensive, and we were just proud that we were able to do what God had called us to do. One time his bus broke down, and he had to get a part, and they came out and they towed his bus into an RV center. While he was at that RV center and they were working on his bus, he was walking around the lot, and he found his dream bus. At that time, that bus, if I'm not mistaken, was like about $500,000 or $600,000, which today would probably be a couple million, He found that bus, and they had little cards of pictures of each vehicle on it so that you could take it home with you. He took a picture of that bus, and he taped it on his dashboard of his old raggedy bus. That was his dream, was someday for him and his family to be able to travel in that bus. Now, here's the neat part. They arrived to the town where they were going to do the evangelism. And when they got there, the pastor, come on the bus and to greet them and welcome them there and everything because they had been there before. And the pastor says, what is this on your dash? He says, that's my dream bus. That's the one the Lord's put in my heart. He says, well, what are you doing to help you get it? He says, what? He says, well, what are you doing and what is the Lord doing to help you get that bus? He says, well, I'm praying for it. He says, well, it's great to pray, he says, but also you got to step out and do a little bit more in faith. We're going to take up a collection tonight for you. So at the revival, they took up a collection, and they put it in a jar, and they labeled it Bus Fund. Well, 2 years later, after going from church to church and people seeing it, 2 years later, he bought the bus. Yeah, isn't that neat? He only had, if I'm not mistaken, about 1/3 of the funds, and then somebody that was very wealthy was in one of the services and had heard about it, and they blessed him with the bus. But it all started with that mental vision of what bus he wanted. So he had a mental vision. He took a picture of it and put it on his dash. So I just want to encourage you. Have a mental vision of whatever it is that you're called to do. Now, let's go to verse 17. Oh, I did that. I'm sorry. We see through here the second thing that you need. So number 1 is have a clear picture of vision in your mind. Number 2 is have a consuming desire to reach the goal. Number 2 is a consuming desire. What do I mean by that? A godly goal that the Lord has placed in your heart for something that you're called to do is a goal that you cannot be talked out of. That's a consuming desire. Is a goal that you cannot be talked out of. It's a goal that's way deep down inside of you, and it cannot be quenched by the circumstances going on around you. A godly goal is a part of you becoming the person that God wants you to be. A godly goal is a part of you becoming the person that God wants you to be or desires for you to be. Your life's purpose. We all want to know, why am I here? We think there's got to be more to life than what I'm seeing right now. And it doesn't matter what age you are or what background you come from. I mean, look at all the people that are really searching. Look at the movie stars that are getting hooked up on drugs, alcohol, toys, everything in the world that they could possibly have, because so often people think if I just had the money, then I'll have everything in life I need. Go to a rehab center and look at all those people. It doesn't give you what your goal is. Whether you're a Christian or whether you're a non-Christian, you still want to know, why am I here? That's why when books come out by some of these pastors, Living a Better Life Now and Finding Your Life's Purpose and all those books, they're number one sellers on the New York Stock book thing. They're always number one because everybody wants to know, why am I here? And especially for a believer, we start thinking, well, you saved me, but now what is my plan now that you saved me? I know that you saved me to do more than what I'm doing. So you ought to have a purpose in your life. And David had this consuming desire to accomplish his goal. And his goal at that immediate time was to kill Goliath. He had a passion. He had a motivation for getting the job done. Now here's the key thing. David did not just see a problem and then say, I'm going to go home and pray about it. Or I'm going to he's more qualified. He's bigger than me. He ought to be going out to face this giant, not me. David didn't do that. David didn't look at the challenge and then pass the buck. David stepped up to the plate. It seemed, I want to share something with you. If God seems silent about your goals, maybe you have goals that you think, and if God seems real silent about those goals, you don't feel Him speaking to you, there's a possibility that those goals may not be from the Lord. Because where God guides, God provides. God, where you are right now, God's preparing you for something later on. So be careful. Pray, make sure it's of the Lord. Go to Him in prayer. Say, Lord, is this of you? Go to other people, other believers. Go to people that's a brother and sister in the Lord. Don't go to an unbeliever. Don't go to a person and say, well, you know what? I'm thinking about going to church now twice a week. And say that to an unbeliever. They'll say, isn't once a week enough? What are you, becoming a Jesus freak? Whatever your goal is, go to another brother and sister and say, how do you feel about this? Will you pray with me about this? And get participation from other people. But on the other hand, if your heart can hardly seem to contain everything to it, I remember when Judith and I felt the Lord that was leading us up to here. This isn't to talk about us, but I know the Lord impressed it on us. I remember her laying in bed at night, and that would be one of the last things that we talked about. And I remember us getting up in the morning time, and that would be one of the first things that would come out of our mouths. And I remember all throughout the day, we would talk about it. I believe that when something like that speaks in your life, where you can hardly contain it, where that's all you want to think about, I would have a good reason to say, I believe that may be from the Lord. And like I said, I'm not saying that for her and I, but that's the example, was whatever the Lord has laid on your heart, and that's all you can consume, that's all you can think about, it's a good chance that's of the Lord that He wants you to do. So when David heard Goliath's challenge to Israelites, everything within him kind of rose to the occasion. He couldn't walk away. He couldn't allow that situation to continue on. So then he decided that he needed to move forward. But as we see, even his own brothers tried to talk him out of it. That's why I said that you can't allow other people to discourage you of what the Lord's trying to talk you into doing. David's brother, when they tried talking about it, David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? David could not be dissuaded from it. Do you have a goal that's challenged you? You yourselves, do you have something that you're so motivated for that you're not going to let other people talk you out of it? Do not allow that. I want to encourage that because people would give you some bad news. When you step forward. If you step forward and say, I'm going to try to read the Bible in a year, you're going to have somebody say to you, well, what about when you go on vacation? You're going to miss a week. They're not going to say, well, why can't you just sit down for 10 minutes a day during that week, every day while you're on vacation? Or why not study before you go extra? Or when you come back, double up on it. They're not going to tell you how to make it up. They're just going to tell you why you shouldn't do it. So don't allow other people. David wouldn't allow his brothers to talk him out of it. We need to be excited about reaching our goals. So number one, you got to have a clear picture of your goal. Number two, you have to have that consuming desire. And number three, you have to have confidence. Confidence that you're going to reach your goal. Let's go right over here to verse 31. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul. And he sent for him. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. In other words, he's saying, don't let this guy give you a heart attack. Don't let him scare you to death. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine. And Saul said to David, You are not able to go against this Philistine and fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. In other words, he's saying, you're just a young kid that ain't never fought a big war. This guy, Goliath, he's been fighting wars since he was your age, since he was a youth. Verse 34, but David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came, and he took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, and I struck it, and I delivered the lamb from its mouth. When it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, and I struck and I killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine, he would be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he would deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So here we see confidence. You know, confidence that will help you reach your goal. David had no doubt whatsoever that he would be able to kill Goliath, because he boldly said to Saul right there in verse 32, let no man's heart fail him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. As we see, King Saul, he tried to dissuade David from it. He says, you're not able to go against this guy and fight with him, for you're a youth. He's been fighting since he was a youth. And then David responded to Saul by telling him about the lion and the bear that he had concluded, and then he concluded that this Philistine would be like one of them. Now, here's the neat part about it. David had confidence, but it was not in his own ability. Because he said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine, in verse 37. So see, David was not relying on his own ability and his own confidence in himself. He was relying, his confidence was in the Lord. Let your confidence in reaching your goal, let it be in the Lord. We're to have confidence in ourselves, just as David was. I can do this, but I need the Lord to help me do it. Because Paul says, when I am weak, then he is strong. But yet we still have to have the confidence to step out and do it, and then rely on the Lord's strength to help us be able to get through this. Talking about confidence, David was facing a guy twice his size. He was also a champion warrior. And here's some young kid that's going up against him. Now here's the neat part about it. David's confidence was related directly with his relationship to God. David's confidence was related directly to his relationship with the Lord and his understanding that God would help him. So David knew about his relationship with the Lord, with the understanding that God would help him, because God put it in David's heart to go against this giant. So David says, I know that the Lord put it in my heart, and I know that he's going to be with me. That's the way you and I are to be. Don't let fear keep you from having your confidence. Fear, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. That's what fear is. False evidence appearing real. Don't just hope that you're going to succeed. Expect to. David did not say, well, I hope the Lord comes in and helps me out in this. No, David expected the Lord to help him out because he was one of the Lord's servants, just like you and I. But he didn't allow fear to overcome him. So number one, you got to have a clear picture. Number two, a consuming desire. Number three, you got to have confidence that you're going to reach your goal. And then number four, you have to have a course of action. A course of action. Look at verse 37. I'm going to read that verse again. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, he would deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with the coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor, and he tried to walk, for he had not tested them. As David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Verse 41, so the Philistine came, and he began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and he saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with the sword, with the spear, and with the javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Would you say David had confidence when he was saying that? Verse 47, then all this assembly shall know the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So it was, when the Philistine arose, and he came and he drew near to meet David, that David hurried and he ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag, and he took out a stone, and he slung it, and he struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine, and he killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran, he stood over the Philistine, he took his sword, and he drew it out of his sheath, and he killed him, and he cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Verse 52, now the men of Israel and Judah arose, and they shouted, they pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Sharaim, even as far as Gath of Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and he brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. When Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of this army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. So the king said, inquire whose son this young man is. Then as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and he brought him before Saul, and with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to David, whose son are you, young man? So David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. So here we see, step number 4, you have to have a course of action. For any goal that has to be met, a course of action has to be taken. A decision has to be made to do something. Steps have to be put into motion towards getting the job done. And what was David's course of action that we just seen here? He knew, first of all, that he needed Saul's approval. He needed Saul's approval. David knew the order of authority. He didn't just step out on his own. Anytime that we do something, there's a step of authority that we're to do it from. You know, I remember as being a worker inside the church for a long time, that when we wanted to do something, we needed to go to our overseer, whoever was over us, and say, how do you feel about this? Then we needed to do it with their blessings and not just go out on our own. Because then you have no blanket, no pillow over you, covering you. And so that's exactly what David did here. He went to authority, and he went to Saul to get authority, and he needed to convince Saul that he could get the job done. Then we heard Saul say, go and may the Lord be with you. Then David had another challenge. Then he had the matter of armor. So Saul offered David his armor. The armor didn't fit. It was too big. It weighed too much. David knew that it wouldn't work. So then David says, okay, this isn't going to work, but I know what I feel most comfortable with. Now that I've got a permission from you to do it, let me go take care of it. And what worked for you may not work for me. That armor worked for Saul, but that same armor didn't work for David. Same way with you and I. Just because somebody does something in a ministry or a certain way in life, it doesn't mean that that's God's plan for you. Oftentimes, He'll give you your own plan. But it's often a wonderful time, like when I go and I meet with other Calvary fellowships that are getting started, it's a great time to hear what God's doing with them, but sometimes He works with us in a different way than what He's working over there. God has a different plan for each person. Sometimes He'll work the same way, but sometimes He works differently with different individuals. So here, what did David do? He went down to a creek. He picked up 5 stones. 5 stones represent what? Graves. David put him in his bag. Now, sometimes people say, why did he choose 5? Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one could be that he used one, that he knew that the one was going to kill Goliath. But also, when you read the scriptures and you study about it, Goliath had 4 brothers. So I didn't know whether possibly the other stones could be them, or if the other Philistines started coming towards him, he would have more stones to use. So we do not know the exact reason that 5 were chosen. But David chose his own stones because he knew which one he felt more comfortable in slinging. Then after getting Saul's approval to go fight, then David drew near the Philistine. That's the key part. After he got permission, he didn't say, well, I'm going to go home and think about it. He acted immediately. Immediately, after he picked up his stones, he went straight out to go against this giant. He didn't think about it, because oftentimes when we know the Lord's leading us to do something, if we're not careful, we say, I'm going to think about it and pray about it, which is a good thing to do. But there's a proper amount of time that we need to think and pray about something. If you wait too long, the devil's going to come along, or one of his angels, one of his people, and they're going to try to talk you out of doing it. There's a proper amount of time. So David, it says he got everything together, then he went immediately to go against this Philistine. Then we know that David took the stone and he slung it up, and his aim was perfect. Now, David had a plan of action. He knew the proper steps to take. He went and first of all, the Lord put it in his heart. Then he went and got permission. And then he went and got the other tools that he needed to get the job done. It was like David had kind of mapped out his plan. He had a sequence. That's what we're to do. When you feel that the Lord's laid it on your heart to do something, you need to write it down. Writing down is the best thing in the world you can do, because if you don't, you'll forget about it. I know I do. My Palm Pilot's full of things that I have to write down because I get so many things going at one time. It's hard to keep organized. And also, there's something else about seeing something written on paper. Something about just seeing it visually in your eyes. Then once you've written down these goals, then that's only the beginning of accomplishing a goal. That's the beginning. Now you have to turn those goals into a course of action. You got a set of steps. You got everything mapped out, what you're supposed to do. You have a strategy for getting the job done, just as David did. But then the goals have to be turned into plans. Then they have to be worked. You can have the finest goals possible, but if you don't step forward and start putting them to work, that's all they are, is goals. How many of us have set goals, but then we never took the proper steps towards getting the goals accomplished? And that's what we have to do. You can have the finest goals, but if you don't turn them into a course of action, they remain that, just a goal. I heard a story about 2 kids that were swimming. It was on a hot summer day, and after they were got out of the water, both of them were putting their trousers on, and as they were getting dressed, a bear walked up to them, and the bear made a real loud noise. Roar! And one guy, he was hurrying to put his pants on, and the other guy looked over and says, you don't really think you can outrun that bear, do you? The guy that was getting dressed, he said, nope. All I have to do is outrun you. He had a plan, didn't he? His plan was to outrun that other guy. But the whole point of it is this guy had a plan. That's what we're to do. We're to have a plan when we want to work things out. So you have to have a clear picture, you have to have a consuming desire, you have to have confidence, and you have to have a course of action. But number 5 is you have to have what they call a calendar of events. You have to have a timetable put on those. You know, it's not enough to say, one of these days I'm going to do this, or one of these days I'm going to do that. It's like when you see somebody and you say, you know what, we need to get together for lunch. Or we need to get together and just sit and chat for a while. How many times have you done that to somebody, and several years later you're still saying we need to get together for lunch? But yet, there's something about it when you say, okay, let's get together next Saturday at 12 o'clock for lunch. You put a timetable on it. There's something about that when you put a timetable on things, it makes things take place a little bit quicker. Have you noticed that? Yes, amazing what happens when you put a date next to a goal. Things seem to move. Your conscience and your subconscious, they seem to be working together on the same task. You move the goal from the idea stage to a reality stage by putting a date next to it. Here we see that David had this immediate goal. That was to kill Goliath. He went in action immediately after getting Saul's approval. Look at verse 40, what he said right there. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch, which he had, and his sling was in his hand. And then look, what was the very next step? And he drew near to Philistine. He didn't go home and think about it. Immediately, he took action upon what he was supposed to do. And that's exactly what he did here. He went into action immediately after getting Saul's approval. He didn't give anybody time to talk him out of it, including his brothers or Saul. Because I guarantee you, if you wait about something too long, somebody will come along and try to talk you out of doing what you're doing. If it's something that you feel the Lord has given you to do, don't allow other people to dissuade you from it, talk you out of it. Then, David needed the cooperation of others. That's number 6. He needed the cooperation of others. You know, as we study this, it looks like it's a one-man show. But David knew that he needed the rest of the Israelite army to be ready, because after he decided and knew that he was going to kill the giant, what was going to keep the other ones from maybe coming after him? Here he may have thousands of that opposing army, then start charging him. Well, what's he going to do? So David knew that he needed the Israelites to stand behind him once he went to face this army here. You know, no goal is ever given to an individual that's set in isolation. God may give a person a goal or a purpose to do, but God will want others to be included inside of it. He desires that other people be involved with the goals that maybe He's given you. I know here, when we felt like the goals that the Lord has given us, that many of you have stepped forward and taken over different ministries, Bible studies. You're coming in, you're helping out, doing this and doing that. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because one person can't come in and do everything. You know, the guy didn't open up Lowe's and then run all the Lowe's himself. You know, he's got help. He has other people to help him inside of his goals. And that's something that we need to be focused on. The things that I want to accomplish, am I involving other people inside of my goal? The Lord wants us to do that. He wants us to take the steps that are necessary to include others. Oftentimes that will inspire other people and allow them to find what their gifts are. By David coming forward to fight with these Israelites, David, that was not his plan when Jesse sent him. It's just once he got there and he seen a need, then he stepped up to it. So you could see how everybody was needed to get the job done. And it's the same way with our own goals. We have to have other people that would be included in it. And then number 7, there has to be consistency in your pursuit of the goals. In other words, there has to be a follow-through. Don't allow yourself to be pulled off course. If you truly believe that God has helped you set a goal, don't allow anyone to deter you or any obstacle that come in the way. Be consistent until that goal is fully reached. Follow through is vital. I remember I had a guy that was one of my customers that was a car sales manager. And they had I think it was about 45 or 50 car salesmen. It was a big dealership. And they used to go through and they would train car salespeople, new people, how to be salespeople. And I said, and just one day, general conversation, I was talking to him. I said, what is the biggest challenge you find training people? He says, you get them to ask them to buy the car. He says, they get out there on the car lot, they take them around, they take them for a test drive, they pop the hood, they show them everything about the car, but then they allow the people walk away without saying, would you like to buy it? You got to follow through with it. He says follow through is the major thing that he found with people that they lacked on, was to follow through. They had a plan. Sometimes they mapped it out. Sometimes they took unnecessary steps, but then they allowed other people to come in and discourage them, and they did not follow through with their purpose. And that's something that we have to be very, very careful about, is don't allow things to come along. David didn't strike Goliath, then jump up and down with joy, and then turn around and go home, did he? No, David followed through. What did he do? Instead, he moved ahead, and then he didn't have his own sword, so he reached down and he took Goliath's sword, he picked it up, and he cut Goliath's head off. He was making sure that Goliath was dead. He cut off the head, but what did he do then? Then it says that he brought it into Jerusalem as proof that he had conquered Goliath. It was proof. It was a follow-through that he did. Now, why did he do that? One kind of proof. That God had delivered his people from their enemy. God delivered his people. Remember David's challenge? The army of the living God? You're not going to come against us. We've got God. God was with me when I fought a lion. God was with me when I fought a bear. God's going to be with me when I fight you. So now that it was fulfilled, David then is turned around, and who's he giving the credit to? The Lord, not himself. So there has to be consistency of following through. Don't just quit and give up. But here's what happens oftentimes. Number 8, you have to control your emotions. You have to control your emotions. This is a biggie. As you go to hit your goals, you'll have many opportunities to become frustrated, angry, and want to quit. We all face them. And if you tell me that you know somebody that don't face this, I'll tell you that they're not telling you the truth. Every one of us want to give up and quit in our walk. But we can't allow that to take place. Don't give full sway to your emotions. Try to keep your emotions under control the best you can so that you press towards your goal. We don't usually get discouraged and say, great, I'm going to continue on. No, usually when we get discouraged, we say, I've had enough. This is over with. I can't take this. Isn't that the truth? That's the way we want to do. But don't allow your control or your emotions to control what you do. What David did, David saved his emotions till he went into battle. He saved everything until he had to do that. As you pursue your goal, don't allow your emotions to control your decisions, because you won't make good decisions. When you're feeling mad or discouraged or sad, that's not the moment to make an important decision in your life. Because what's going to happen is you're going to look back at it and you're going to say, I could have, I should have. What if I? And we all said before, this is the big thing, the two thieves, that when Jesus was crucified on the cross with two thieves, our biggest thieves that we hang between is, what if, or I could have. Those are the two thieves that will rob you and I of most of our challenges in life that would keep us from reaching our goals. Is we keep wanting to use those as excuses, and we can't do that. Can't do that at all. Don't let this fear, don't let all that stuff paralyze you. Take control over it. At least if you can't take control of it, pray about it and pray through it before you decide on it and take action. Then number 9, take the courage to act. David obviously felt extraordinary courage. But here's the thing. That courage that David acquired to face Goliath, that didn't develop that day. That took years for David to get the courage to have the strength and the determination to fight that. David said that he had fought a lion and a bear in the past. That gave David the courage to act that day. It's just like right now, God's preparing each one of us for something for the future. We don't know what it is maybe yet. Some people may know what the Lord has planned for them. Some people don't know. But He's preparing you right now. Anytime you talk to somebody that you would consider, quote, what you say, maybe they're successful or maybe they're ahead of their times, they will always tell you that God was preparing them to get them to where they are. It didn't just happen. He prepares us for it. Where God guides, He provides. Now you say, how does He prepare us? Oftentimes it's through the Word. When you and I read stories like this, I hope that it encourages us to overcome difficulties in life. By reading these great stories in the Bible. By us hearing Rocky Road. Don't let the everyday struggles of life overcome you. Enjoy your Rocky Road ice cream at the end of the day. It's by us hearing things, these stories and the encouragement of other people through the Scriptures that will help us overcome these difficulties that we have in life. So one of the best ways to do that is speak to the Lord. Get down on your knees and pray to the Lord. Ask Him, say, what direction are you giving me? Now give me the courage to hang in there and keep going through with it. But here's another thing. You will also benefit in reaching your goals by associating with people who are encouragers. Who are encouragers. You don't want to, if you're a person that's trying to be faithful to the Lord and come to church on a weekly basis, you don't want to get your encouragement from somebody that don't go to church. You don't want to get your encouragement by somebody that doesn't go twice a week. If that's your goal, go twice a week, 3 times a week, once a week, whatever it may be. The Lord lays everybody different on everybody's hearts. But whatever your goal is, go to an encourager in that area and not somebody that's not an encourager. Like the old saying is, you are who you hang out with. We have to be careful of what we do. Choose to be around people who are kind of energetic and enthusiastic. They're not afraid to take risks. People that aren't afraid to tackle problems. Those are the type of people that you really want to hang out with the most. Then number 10, you got to have a conscience, dependence upon the Lord. When we read this 1 Samuel chapter 17, as a whole, you'll find that David repeatedly referred to the Lord as his dependence. 37, verse 37, moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, He would deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Then also down in verses 45, David said over there, David said to the Philistine, you came to me with the sword, with the spear, and with the javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you had defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. This day I will give the carcass of the camp of the Philistines, of the birds of the air, and the wild beasts of the earth. And then he goes down verse 47, then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands. See how David's, all his dependence was upon the Lord. But David, though, he took the first step by deciding, hey, if that job needs to get done, I'm not going to rely on my brothers. I'm not going to rely on Saul. I'm not going to rely on the other Philistines. There's a guy here that's causing the other brothers in the Lord a problem. The fright's on their face. They're stepping back. I'm going to take over. I'm going to step up. And then once he made that decision to step up, then other people tried to say, David, you can't do that. But David didn't listen to him. David went to the Lord and he said, the Lord will give me my strength. The Lord will help me go through it. And then he pursued. He got a plan. He followed through. He did not give up. But everything that David did, David relied on the Lord for total dependence. Those are the things that you and I need to do. When the Lord does do something for you, remind yourself and remind others that it was the Lord who did it and not yourself. Those are the stories where we all gain from, is when we remind each other that what we did, the Lord did it. The Lord did it. Just as David said right through there. You know, we have to learn to trust the Lord and allow Him to work out His purposes in our life. But those who fail to plan, they plan to fail. I encourage you, and I do it all the time. Not that I'm somebody to look at, because I don't mean that. But I'm saying that I use my Palm Pilot daily. I write down things that need to be done to help remind me of the things that I do. And if it's a long-term plan, I bite it down into small pieces. They have goals to step towards. You don't just get on a pair of scales and lose 30 pounds right off the bat. You say, okay, I'm going to lose 5 pounds this week, and write it down, 5 pounds this week. Or if I'm going to read the book of Samuel this week, okay, Samuel's got how many chapters, and divide it down into 2 days, and then set up a small plan to meet that for the week. But make some type of a timetable, or write down the plan that you're going to do. So sit down, get along with the Lord, pray and ask Him. Say, Lord, make your goals clear to me, and give me the willpower to do these 10 steps that I take. Something I'd encourage you to do is take those 10 steps, hang them on your bathroom mirror. Hang them on your dash. Like Ken did with the picture of the bus. Take them, put them on your refrigerator. Especially if one of your goals is trying to lose weight. Hang it on the refrigerator. Whatever it may be that the Lord's leading you to do, take and do that. Remember, if you start today, it's just like if I said, if you step over this line, you'll have a better life. You have to step over the line. Today's the day. New Year. As a matter of fact, Judith and I got new phones yesterday. Or she got a new phone for Christmas. And I got her other phone. So we went through last night. And we were programming the phones. And I put down on my phone, New Year, new day for the Lord. Do that. Encourage yourself. Now, every time I open up my phone, I'm going to see that. Put it somewhere, these different steps of something that the Lord has for you. Those who usually don't accomplish any goals are people that don't write things down. They don't have a plan of action. They don't have any plan of action. Let's pray.